enough talk about geopolitics, enough talk about military, enough talk about Russia. Let's have the one conversation that really matters, the panel on AI, which will be moderated by our very own from the Latvian MFA, Viktors Makarovs, our special envoy on digital affairs. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for the introduction. But I would perhaps challenge a little bit that we are going to leave geopolitics aside. We're going to discuss exactly that today. Now, Riga conference is a serious conference, so no serious conference these days goes without talking about AI, so we have to do it. It's mandated. And before we go into the detail, just a quick survey while you're getting settled in your seats. Please, those who use or knowingly have used AI over the last year, please raise your hands. The majority here. And please, those who feel this is a tremendous new technology that will change your world and the way you live, please raise your hands. Quite many. We will see if we can scare you off. Now, what we are going to do today is, instead of focusing on the technology itself, we will ask what AI will mean for the world, for the geopolitics that we love to discuss at the Riga conference. Who will wield the technological power of AI? Is AI going to favor ambitious authoritarians by enabling more surveillance, digital censorship, and mind control? Or are the big companies themselves on track to dominating our digital world, controlling data, knowledge, and human agency? And not to give in to doom and gloom, not right away at least, how can we in open societies survive and thrive in this new technological era? To discuss this, we have a panel today, fantastic speakers. Doctor of Engineering Sciences, Renāta Strazdiņa. Renāta is the National Technology Officer for Central Europe at Microsoft, so you manage a lot of countries, actually not just one. We have with us Dr. Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C., but also in Brussels and other places. Mr. Jānis Sārts is Director of the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, and Mr. Shashank Joshi, the Economist Defense Editor, and a frequent podcast voice. So first, let's look at what the power of AI actually is now and in the near future, and go to Renāta. Now, your company, Microsoft, is deeply involved in AI, so you are well positioned to provide us with some technological context for our discussion. Most people today associate AI with ChatGPT or other generative AIs, but we know, of course, AI is much more than that. So 5-10 years down the road, what is the transformative power of AI for good and for bad? Who are the key tech players in the space, and are they prepared to be held accountable for the consequences of their technologies for societies? Renāta, please.
Yeah, thank you, and very good afternoon. And I need to confess that I was listening this morning online, your discussions, and I was thinking, oh, it's a very interesting time we live in, because myself as a computer scientist, I need to go and participate in foreign policy debate. So I couldn't imagine that I will do something like this a couple of years ago, but here I am. And answering your question, you are very right that generative AI is this AI type that is most talked about. But there are, as we know, many other types of artificial intelligence, be it computer vision, widely used already for decades, I would say, in manufacturing, in road safety, in healthcare. We have models and algorithms for languages. We are widely using already for many, many years different AI types in banking. And this technology already has proven its value in transforming different businesses across different industries. But of course, generative AI is a little bit different, and it was gaining popularity so quickly that this was the first time, at least in my experience, and I have almost 30 years, when 100 million users of one application, ChatGPT, the famous application of generative AI, this application reached 100 million users just in 3 months. In comparison, for internet, it was 7 years. For Facebook, 4.5 years, just 3 months. And why it is so? Because we do not need specific technical skills and knowledge to use this technology. It is different with other types of artificial intelligence. We still need to learn something specific if we want to use a solution that is using, for example, computer vision. Here, we are just using our natural language, be it English, be it Latvian, be it Hungarian, and we can get reasonably good outcome. And we see also from our customer experience that usage of generative AI is also showing very clear productivity benefits on individual level, and also it gives then productivity increase on company or organization level. And talking about future, there is very clear path of development, because right now we see there are investments in purpose-built AI infrastructure, like supercomputers for massive AI training. We are seeing development of confidential AI that is also becoming, more and more close. And of course, large language models and small language models are developing super fast. And they are getting faster, and they are getting cheaper. So it means more and more companies and also individuals will be able to use them and get those benefits. And the recent announcement for OpenAI, one of the major players in the area, already showed reasonably good reasoning capabilities. It wasn't before. It was like a couple weeks ago. And it means that there will be more opportunities to use this, and companies and individuals will use it to really unlock the productivity, because generative AI is not a recipe for everything. So this is one thing that we also need to remember. But now about downsides. We in industry and also in Microsoft, we see those potential downsides that are also coming with this very rapid advancement of generative AI. So these are ethical and social concerns, like concerns about job displacement because of automation. We have privacy concerns around generative AI. And of course, we have also not only concerns, but we see how AI is misused for malicious purposes. And this is another dimension that we need to put into this already very complex picture when we are talking about AI. This is cybersecurity, because cyber criminal threat actors are also using the same technology to develop their business. And really, nowadays we are talking about cyber crime as industry, and this is 8 trillion industry per year and growing by speed of 50% year over year. And it means that we need to use, and we are already using, we are analyzing signals, we are augmenting people capabilities in cyber security in order to fight cybercrime and to decrease those risks. That's why for us in Microsoft and also broader industry, it is very important that we are developing AI that is responsible by design, meaning that it's transparent, inclusive, human is in the loop always. And we are putting safety and security first. And we cannot do this alone as industry. We need to work together in partnerships, because as I said, and I'm repeating myself already, this is such a complex challenge that we are seeing there, and also opportunity, that only working together we can solve it.
Thank you, Renata. But just before we go to the next speaker, one question. You said that your company, and probably the industry as such, is going to be responsible. But what will prevent malign actors from taking the model you have now, or an open source model, and shaping it in the way that they see fit, where they don't take any interest in responsibility, basically a malign use? Is there anything to be done?
So of course we cannot prevent somebody is taking, because they are using the same large language models and small language models. This is about prevention, because what we are doing on the side of prevention, we are sharing those threat signals. We are sharing also as a Microsoft, we are sharing with governments, and we are proactively putting safeguards in place in order to prevent. And you are very right, so there is one more aspect, that there are cybersecurity risks that are specifically related to machine learning algorithms. It means that people can attack those algorithms in order to make them work differently. So, but the thing that we can do, we can share the information and we can work together on prevention.
Great, thank you. Alina, so you are a long-time observer of the interplay between technology and geopolitics, and you have been warning about the global trend towards digital authoritarianism for a long time. So CIPA report last year concluded that the best way for us to engrave democratic values in technology is to be innovation leaders. It is time for Europe, you write in the report, or the authors rather, hand in hand with the United States and other democratic allies to lead the way again in these groundbreaking technologies. Fantastic intention. Now, can AI open up for a democratic revival, or is it more likely to strengthen regimes that rely on oppression, surveillance, and manipulation? How optimistic are you that come next January, we are going to see the transatlantic partners leading hand in hand rather than twisting each other's arms?
Well, first of all, it's really fantastic to be back in Riga and in Latvia. It's been a long time and too long. I'll make sure not to stay away for so many years again and to be part of this conversation. You know, Victor's, you opened the discussion saying that technology is about geopolitics, and I couldn't agree with you more. But until very recently, this conversation on tech was not part of our security conversation more broadly. Just a few years ago, in fact. But I think this is indicative of what we consistently see, which is that policy, especially in democratic societies, lags behind the development of technology. That has been the case with pretty much the advent of every single technology, but I think the rapid pace of technological innovation and penetration across all the sectors of our societies is so fast now that it is basically impossible for our democratic institutions, which were designed in some cases, in the US case, some hundreds of years ago, to be able to respond to the transformative changes that are in some cases wreaking havoc and in some other cases providing opportunity across the democratic space. And I think this gap between policy and technological rapidity is a real problem that we have not thought through or gotten our minds around. How do we actually think about setting the rules of the road that are embedded in values of openness, transparency, and authenticity, democratic values, in a way that is going to be a global rules maker versus us becoming global rules takers, because we're allowing other authoritarian minded states. China is, of course, the one we're talking about here. China is a competitor, not just when it comes to military, security, and economic competition, certainly with the United States and with Europe. It is also catching up with American companies in terms of driving tech innovation. So I think this is the real problem when you start thinking about. And you know, to your question about, well, is there an opportunity with a new European Commission now coming into place? We'll have a new US administration. whatever it's going to be coming into place in January, United States, is there an opportunity for us to actually restart a positive agenda for cooperation on tech policy? I think there is, but unfortunately, when I look at the last several years, the problem we've seen is not just a gap at the national level between tech innovation and policy, it's also a gap between Europe and the United States. So we have not seen a move towards convergence in how we think about the future of democracies in driving technological innovation, and also, I think, benefiting from that, because we do talk a lot about risk. Risk has been the big focus when it comes to AI, of course, but not just AI, basically all emerging tech. But we also have to think about the duality of these technologies and the dual applications, and start thinking about opportunities more and more. Because to my mind, if we look at what Europe is today in particular, we just, as everyone here knows, had what has been, I think, a bomb here, which is the Draghi report on competitiveness. I think that highlighted some fundamental foundational problems in Europe's ability to compete on the global stage across a variety of sectors. There's a real opportunity, I think, with tech adaptation and adoption across many sectors for Europe to carve out a place for itself, not just as a global rule setter and regulator, which certainly Europe is that now. We see the adoption of European regulation across many countries now in the world. But how do you actually pair that with starting to lead on innovation as well, and understanding that there is benefits in economic growth, but also in military capability, because that's an issue that we often don't marry when we talk about AI or other emerging tech, that there is a huge component that of emerging tech integration into our military capability deployments. And we're seeing that happening every day in Ukraine. And if we're thinking about competition in terms of economic, political, as well as, of course, military competition on the global stage, technology provides an opportunity for us to build a hyper-capable future force that will be fit to address the increasingly uncertain and dangerous geopolitical environment that we find ourselves in. So last point to make, and I'm sure we'll get into the conversation, is, you asked about in the previous conversation about the kind of timelines and where are we in this space, especially when it comes to AI. Are we in the hair and fire phase? I think that's where we've been for several years. It's all about high risk. Are we in the phase where we're thinking more about the duality and the cost benefits and maybe focusing more on benefits? I also think we're in a Precambrian moment. And what I mean by that is, you and I were chatting earlier about not just AI, but quantum, right? And everybody has a different timeline for where we're going to have the breakthrough on quantum computing. We're not there yet, but some companies project that they will have a fully functioning quantum computing in 10 years. And that China is likely to have one, though we don't know exactly, but likely, maybe they're a few years behind, so maybe 15, okay? When you get to that point and you have the intersection of machine learning technologies and quantum processing capabilities, I think this is going to be a complete shock. And if we think we've been shocked by the advent of the internet or social media or the level of AI right now, we really haven't seen anything yet. And I think the question that we should be thinking about is how do we start to switch this, we respond after the technology is already out, to start thinking now about how do we set rules of the road that will, at the end of the day, allow us to innovate while in a regulatory environment that will put human rights first and that will focus on high risk versus just labeling everything as risk. So I think those are the kinds of questions that we're thinking about in Washington. But my concern, of course, is that Europe will not have a place in these conversations very soon. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because, we look at so many different measures of like research and development investment, unicorn companies, market cap, all kinds of measure of competitiveness. There are no European companies there. Forget about investment from European governments or even the EU itself, and that is a real problem. It's a real problem.
Well, thank you. I guess whatever the answer to who will wield the power of AI is, it's not Europe, based on what you say. And no to the organizers, next year, let's discuss quantum. Now, Yanis, you have long warned about the potential harms AI poses to information integrity, disinformation, and so on and so on. You will tell us in more detail, I suspect. Yet you also believe that the best way to address these risks is by adopting the technology and embracing innovation. And at your conference, I guess you let AI moderate one of your panels. Would be really interesting to hear your impressions. Will AI literacy and innovation provide our societies with enough leverage? Who will gain and who will lose power in an information environment built on AI? And how can democracies confront accountability avoidant, I'll dare say, tech companies and also assertive authoritarian regimes?
Well, thank you very much for very easy questions. Well, I'm tempted to kind of look at where we are. This is Teutonic Knights' meeting place 500 years ago. And about a few hundred years before that, from this place, a small group of people conquered all of what is current Latvia and Estonia. Based on what? What was the edge? There were two things. One was the organization, the way they organized and the way they were kind of cooperating with some of the, in particular, Northern German societies. And the other was the weaponry, the technology that was going to the weaponry that allowed these people to conquer Estonia and Latvia and create Livonia. And that's not the only case where technology and adaptation of technology and organization has shaped the history. So there's nothing new in that. And we're pretty much in the same space we've always been, but that the technology's decisiveness is much more profound. And the speed of the development is at a very different place. From my vantage point being at the Stratcom Center, I, of course, first and foremost look at the way it affects information. And what strikes me, AI, in a generative form of it, is in particular fit for the information space. If there is going to be an effect, it certainly is going to have an effect in the information space, because it's digital these days. And that's how it, and it's data, and it's people, and that's where it is good at. Let's look at some of the parameters. OpenAI's last model 01, they do these threat cards on them, and one of these things they measure is the persuasiveness of this model. And 01 preview mitigated scores at 81.7 percentile point of persuasion, meaning it's better at persuasion than 80% of humans on one metrics. You can discuss metrics, but then Anthropic's Claude model measurement also shows that it is roughly at the average human level of persuasiveness. And that is within 3 years of us having ability to tamper. My question is, what will be the metrics in 3 years? Can it reach 98 percentile point of persuasiveness? How gonna we do a lot of things we used to have humans to persuade humans? Other metrics, recently Science magazine showed their research where people, the ones in US believe in conspiracy theories. Interesting that there were a huge percentage of people in the US believing, I think 70+% in different kinds of conspiracy theories, were asked to interact with AI, and then there was a measurement. What do they continue to believe? And that was a staggering 20% drop in the belief in a conspiracy theory after allegedly 9 minutes conversation with AI. Any of you have talked with conspiracy theorists? I can't say that I have ever reached such number. I'm just too impatient for this. And 27% more started to doubt. So these are some of the metrics. You might have different ones. But think of the capability to affect the cognitive space that is emerging right now. And it's agnostic. It can go either way. It can do it for good, for bad. The question I have is, have we thought through how we protect a normal societal processes for that? How we do run democracy? Would it end up that the one that has a better technological solution just wins the elections because the persuasion levels are just better? I think these are the emerging questions. And of course, as Renata said, these models start to exhibit something that you would call reasoning. There's an Apple paper questioning that very recently. But then again, what is reasoning? I think the Apple's approach problem was they were idealizing reasoning, something that they put forward I think doesn't exist in humans. So they were benchmarking something else than us. So I think we're in a profound change. And certainly when I look in this competitive perspective of these things, clearly if you have that kind of power, that of course also promises potential control of human behavior. And who's always been trying to achieve that? Authoritarian regimes, right? So I think there is very little doubt in the way they will approach. I agree, China in particular is not wanting to create AGI. That kind of fundamentally undermines the thinking about the world. But the system that controls the way Chinese and other probably citizens behave, I think is something they want. We want something different. Can we produce that in a way that doesn't blow up the democratic process? If we look at social media lessons learned, I'm not very cheerful so far. But can we apply these lessons learned to the way we handle this new technology? I think that's the main question. And I don't think we have much time to discuss it. Well, it might be a bit exaggeration that the agents are coming next year. But like in a few years, I think that is possible. And if we've not solved some of the basic questions in that, I think we'll be up for a very wild ride. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question, Janis. Now, you mentioned one potential actor who aspires to use AI. You mentioned China. But I imagine there are lots of other actors salivating over the opportunities that AI provides. Could you tell us who these actors might be? I mean, not mentioning perhaps each and every one, but it looks like this is a pretty democratic technology.
Well, it is, but there are some also forbidding parts. You have to also remember all the time the infrastructure that it relies on, which is a compute and energy that is required to kind of facilitate the output. I think there you could see new emerging actors like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates kind of very focused on that part of development. As far as Russia is concerned, you see both OpenAI and some others reporting that they're tinkering with these models. What I'm surprised with, and I like what I see, is in the context of what they've shown in the US elections, is they're not really so much forward-leaning as what we see is the possible. So and my hypothesis, they're themselves struggling to adjust with the speed. So keeping up with the pace is a problem, because when we look, and some of our recent researchers show that you can do much more that we've seen with these models already in place.
Great, thank you. Shashank, so one of the key themes in your recent brief on AI and warfare in The Economist is, as far as I understood it, is the concern that once AI is brought into the decision-making process, humans actually risk losing control. The military domain might be the first where AI could soon make life and death decisions in mere seconds. Can we ever reach a point where we trust AI enough to give it a role in national security and military decisions? And will geopolitical competitions drive countries to delegate decision-making power to AI despite all these risks?
It's a great question, and I want to begin directly answering it by just recounting a story, which is Israel was looking to take out surface-to-air missile sites in southern Lebanon. And to do that, it used a system that could calculate which of its planes were in the air at what time, how much fuel and armament they carried, the location of the missile sites, and working out, rather than staff officers doing it on pen and paper on a blackboard, with dozens of people in a room, a computer system to optimize some of these decisions. And that wasn't this year. This was 1982. In the first invasion of Lebanon. It was called Operation Mole Cricket. It's a key episode in Israeli military history. But the reason I recount it is just obviously to remind us all that the phenomenon you describe, which is some delegation to a computer system that you can choose to call artificial intelligence or not, depending on how you draw the boundaries of the technology, is decades old, and I could give you many other examples from Vietnam and other conflicts. So we're not really asking the question, are we going to be using artificial intelligence to assist with military decision-making? That ship has sailed. We're really asking, how are we doing it, how far are we going, and how do you do it effectively and humanely and ethically? That's the question. So that's story one. Story two is, so I was telling some colleagues over dinner yesterday, I recently got back from China, and when I was in Shanghai, perhaps against my better judgment, I bought a Chinese drone for want of good consumer alternatives in America and Europe, actually, on this subject. And it's a small drone, just over 100 euros, but it can fly off the palm of your hand, and it can follow you around using basic object tracking. And again, that's not new. There's nothing special in that. Drones have been doing that for 10, 15 years. You may have seen your friends be able to, drones do that. The novel thing is it can do it at 100 euros. Right? It's the cost. It's the cost curve. You would have cost you about £1,000 to have done that 10 years ago on a DJI drone. And the point is, in the military context, what that gives us is the possibility of scale, of cheap, effective guidance systems inside the munition, on the edge, in a small chip. In some cases, commercial chips that are capable of doing this. You're not talking about high-end, high-end chips that are necessary for this. Some of you would have looked at the insides of Ukrainian and Russian drones. However, whilst that is one of the ways in which this technology is going to change warfare and will affect warfare, the point of the brief, and this is where I come back to what you said, actually is that sometimes I think we focus too much on the sharp, pointy, killing end of this, right? The AI inside the munition, the thing that will find a Russian tank or a soldier and go bang. Of course, that's very important. It's important because it allows us to circumvent electronic warfare and do terminal guidance in the last 100 meters when jamming may have taken out guidance. Yes. But some of the most difficult and interesting questions are in the bit before the sharp, pointy end, around command and control, around decision support for commanders. Many of you will have seen reporting around Israel's use of decision support systems for intelligence gathering and target recognition in Gaza. And there are many comparable examples in other forces as well. And I think the really important point here is to say that what we are seeing in Russia and Ukraine are two forces that are fighting, from the Ukrainian side, an existential war of survival without necessarily all the same considerations and constraints and worries that Western armies have been thinking about for 10 years, because they are fighting to maximize effectiveness on the battlefield, and they are pushing ahead with innovation and experimentation and all of these other things. And that is going to drive a much broader process that forces us all to ask, how much control do we wish to delegate to these systems? But the final point I'll say is that I don't think this is just some Terminator-style future in which a commander says, okay, here you go, pick your target, fire away, kill everything. And the fundamental reason for that is that military commanders, they don't want a free-for-all, right? They want to use limited military resources in a rational, effective way. They don't want robots that just kill everything in sight. That isn't an effective, efficient use of military resources for an army that's constrained. And the thing to note here is that AI will accelerate war, it will speed it up, it will make it easier to find targets, all of these other things. But just because you can see 1,000 targets on the battlefield doesn't mean you have 1,000 munitions to fire at them. And so to end on, all I'll say is that AI is sometimes presented in this context as an alternative to traditional military mass and defense industrial capabilities. Actually, it isn't an alternative, it's a supplement, and it demands that you still have the conventional defense industrial base just to service all the new targets and capabilities that your AI is finding for you. So these are not alternatives, these are complements.
Excellent. Quick supplementary question. So you mentioned Israel and Ukraine as some of the countries that actually use this technological shift on the battlefield. Who else? Well, who are the leaders? The US, obviously, China, perhaps. Who else is really leading in AI in military area?
Well, if you look at the Chinese and US spending, they're broadly spent. There was a good report by the Center for Security and Technology at Georgetown, Security and Emerging Technology, CSET at Georgetown. They're broadly spending on comparable things, the same sorts of things. And if you look at the discourse in America and China, you find the same kind of subtext, which is, my God, the other side's racing ahead. And actually, it isn't clear that that's the case at all. And my gut feeling is, whilst there are companies doing remarkable things in the United States, and we know who some of them are, and in China it's a little bit more opaque, but we see object recognition aboard some of their new satellites, for instance, being able to spot individual features, troop concentrations, using processing on the edge of the satellite. Yes. I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the data that comes from the battlefield. America has some of the best weapons in the world, but we have seen how when pitted against a real war in real conditions, like any military system, they suffer setbacks because the enemy adapts with electronic warfare or something else. So I think that actually some of the most significant innovation is being done, yes, by American and European companies, but only when they test their systems in the battlefield in real world conditions and get the data back. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of Ukrainians telling me, that company, I go to them and say, tell me, this company's telling me they're doing an amazing thing. Are they really? And the Ukrainians will say, well, yeah, but it lasted for about 3 days, and we haven't taken it out the box since then because it didn't work. So real-world data, there is no substitute, and you can tell that to the Chinese and the Americans.
Well, so this is what we have at the moment, and I think we need to take up the issue of international norm building. Here, we have seen how norms are being created in regions such as the EU with the AI Act. The UN is quite advanced and very interested in establishing a very general framework. But is this sufficient to ensure true accountability of private companies and also state actors? This is something that I want you to answer perhaps rather concisely. How much can we hope to achieve by building these norms? The good actors will abide by these, will bad or scrupulous actors do that as well?
I can start the conversation. I think we underestimate we overestimate goodwill, is how I would say it. Obviously, when it comes to all these principles around AI, which is the hot topic, but it goes much more broadly than that. Most of the companies that are signing up to these principles and have been for several years in various iterations are Western firms. American companies primarily because they're leading the way. Chinese companies are not, and they won't. Neither will potentially Russian or other companies as well. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves, who are we setting the norms for? And what are we going to do when, and I would say we're already there, companies that are controlled by authoritarian states don't care and will not abide by the rules of the road, will not abide by even international, not just norms, but even if we have some sort of enforcement mechanisms, which currently we do not. This is all volunteerism, basically, at a multilateral level. How much is it going to matter? I think this is a big question that we don't have a good answer to. Are we just basically putting a cap on our own ability to really harness these technologies to their full capabilities, while the other side has no such caps and has no such concerns about issues around democratic values or human rights?
Yanis, please.
Yeah, I think very much to complement what Alina said, this technological development happens in a context of increased rivalry globally, and in a way I'd say somewhat of a dismantling of the order of the world that we've seen over the last 30 years, which is of course not helpful to create a generic norms that everybody's going to abide by. And this of course is clearly a promising, very powerful technology, even more difficult to constrain yourself. But I think it is essential that we build it based on the values we are really kind of building our democracy, which being the freedom of choice, transparency, freedom of speech. All of those have to be in one way or another represented, probably transformed. But I'm not sure, and actually I'm pretty much kind of skeptical whether the traditional regulatory process would lead us there.
Yeah.
And that's where my thought of actually the way you shape it by embracing technology and shaping it from within rather than from external perspective trying to put the role, kind of the regulatory frameworks. I don't have a feel it will work.
I would like to bring Renata and Shashank into this conversation as well. Renata, so how, are you more optimistic than Yanis is on the role of regulation here?
In general, I'm optimistic about what we can do if we are, having the right values and we are following them. And I believe in that innovation is crucial, but this comes with responsibility. And this comes with big responsibility from all of us, being industry, being public sector. And I fully agree with Yanis that we can set of principles. And this is also what we see in EU AI Act and Microsoft Responsible AI Framework that was already published in 2016. Actually, we have majority of what is described now in EU AI Act. But the thing is about application. And this is not about just industry being compliant with this, but this is about each and everyone understanding what are the risks, how we can prevent them, and what are the risks that we need to mitigate. And for this, we were not mentioning in our discussion skilling. Because the people in technology, they have studied and they have learned AI for many, many years. But now we are at the point where everyone needs to understand how this technology works and what's behind. And that's why we are advocating for skilling not only those that are developing technology, but also those that are using, those that are making decisions. And this will be a journey to learn, to understand, and only then, by sitting together, by having discussions, so what are the risks, because the technology is the same as we discussed, but depending on scenario, it could be very risky, and it could be or it could be totally acceptable. That's why it will be a very, very different process in application. But I think that the principles are there already.
Can I address just two adjacent points to this? One of them, at the highest level, we shouldn't underestimate the fact or the achievement that large companies building frontier models are pre-submitting these models for safety checks. They're looking at their capacity to generate serious harms, whether in generating new novel chemical weapons or synthetic biological dangers, or let alone offensive cyber risks. That's an achievement that wasn't guaranteed. And actually, I think that even China and Russia have a certain interest in ensuring, that models, not that in the Russian case they have much to worry about by way of, having these frontier models, but that they don't produce these things. So we've made a lot of progress on AI safety, the Bletchley Park Summit, the summit that followed earlier this year as well. On my level, the military level, I think the picture is a bit more murky. I've followed the debate around lethal autonomous weapons for 10 years, and Russia-Ukraine shows us that this technology on the battlefield has outrun all of those diplomatic debates, quite frankly. And if the the debates in the UN and other places were we need meaningful human control of autonomous weapon systems, which is a worthy and praiseworthy goal. But if you ask people, look at Ukraine. Do you see any weapon system in use on the battlefield that, in your opinion, would fall under the purview of a potential legally binding ban or treaty? No one can really answer that question. And the fact that they can't answer it because of a lack of understanding as to what actually is being used and the guts of it and the difference between features, that tells you why, in my opinion, a serious regulatory ban or prohibition on these systems is unworkable. The best we can achieve is agreements around things like, let's not put this stuff in nuclear weapon decision systems. So far, the Americans have unilaterally committed that. We haven't seen comparable commitments in public from Russia or China, I'll just note.
Okay, so that's a nice benchmark. So let's not combine AI and nuclear so far. Extremely optimistic. I have lots of questions, but so has the audience. So I can see. Let's go this way, please. And we will need a microphone.
Thank you. Zanda Kalna Ilkushevitsa, Deputy Speaker of Latvian Parliament. And I would like to go back to this interaction between AI and democracy. And so Yanis mentioned that we can imagine what can happen if the elections are won by an actor that is just best in using technology. My question is, so what could happen if the elections are won not only by the best actor using technology, but actually by a malicious third state actor implementing malicious foreign interference campaign? And so the question is, how can we avoid that? By that, democracy actually is killed by democratic instruments. And if you were a doctor, what would be your prescription number one to avoid situation where it's possible to totally change democracy using AI by a malicious third actor?
Thank you. Let's take this question separately first. We have more than a doctor, we have a whole concilium perhaps that can chime in on this. But over to you, Yanis, first.
Well, I think first and foremost, like everything in the world, also democracy has to evolve. I think that's, and also when I look right now at the US elections, is clearly that if you keep on to a certain set of rules for too long, it might be a hazard, in my view. So I think we first have to answer this question: what does the democracy look in this new set of technological development? And as we saw, not answering that question within the context of social media led to a lot of the effects we see right now. I think pretty much ensuring, as I've said, one citizen, one voice, transparency when you're dealing with something that is synthetic or real, which seems kind of self-explanatory, but in fact these days and increasingly will not be distinguishable by any way and means, given we pursue the pace as this is right now. Accountability, and of course limiting certain elements of AI, and as we discussed, AI is all across many different areas, to what it should not be able to do, like by design. I think some of the things that I think we have to think about, the trouble is the speed. And that's where is my biggest concern, is the speed of that development is so fast that in most of the AI conferences I participate, we talk about the future of what is available right now, instead of really thinking what will be happening in the future. And that's something I don't have an answer right now.
It's related, not directly necessarily to your question, because I think that's maybe even a separate conversation to be had about election integrity and the use of artificial intelligence in the electoral process. But I think this question of how do we win this tech race, right? And how do we ensure that it is democratic norms and values and principles that dominate how we use technologies and how people across the world use technologies. And I think we forget that values do travel through technology. And if I were sitting in a European government or in the US government, I would be working hand in glove with every single tech leader who is leading the innovation, artificial intelligence, and other technologies to ensure that in countries in Africa, in South America, all across the world, people are using Western products versus Chinese products, right? Versus saying, you know, we got to put a cap on these companies' ability to innovate. We have to have these rules and norms that on the ground and battlefield nobody cares about, or even knows about, or can even understand, right? You know, we are in this situation already. You know, many years ago, I remember thinking, you know, if I had a teenage son or daughter, would I prefer them to use, you know, Facebook at the time or some Chinese social media? Well, guess what? You know, TikTok is that Chinese social media. They're pretending to abide by all kinds of transparency rules. I don't believe it for a second. What has been our solution in the United States for that? Let's try to ban TikTok now that millions and millions of people have adopted it. Well, okay, that's not going to work either. So I think right now we have an opportunity to work together in the public and private domain to take advantage of the kind of tech optimism that we see in these countries, to get them Western tech and to push out competition from Chinese firms. I mean, that should be our joint transatlantic policy to ensure we have a democratic digital domain.
Renate, I want to also address this question to you. And I know if I ask you, so what is Microsoft doing to help address this issue? You will have a perfect answer. But I also want you to answer the next question. Do you feel that Microsoft and other tech companies are doing enough and investing enough?
Yeah, so in terms of what we are doing, as I said, so we are developing and we are committing that we will continue this, developing artificial intelligence that is responsible by design. And it means that there are safeguards, as Janis said. So in technology world, you can put safeguards in that is preventing to do one or another thing by potential users. But as much as there is importance of what technology developers are doing, it is also about users understanding what they are using and how they are using this. And that's why we are investing and we will be investing in skilling and making sure that people have this opportunity to learn and understand what does it mean to use AI responsibly. Of course, it doesn't prevent that there will be bad actors who will use the technology for their malicious purposes. Talking about whether we can do more, definitely, industry always can do more because we all always can do more. But we are open for dialogue, and we are talking to governments, we are talking to academia and NGOs in order to understand what are the best ways how we can both strengthen this responsibility part of the technology, but also how we can make sure that users are using technology responsibly.
Okay, sorry, I want to dwell on this a little bit more. Imagine I am the responsible official from a small, under-resourced country. I come to you and say, look, I have an election coming up in 6 months, and I'm afraid that a powerful foreign actor is going to mess with us, with the electoral process, by using AI. Can you help? Do you have a support package now, not 5 years to skill people?
No, we can have this now. And so there are democracy forward programs, and there are countries who are using across the globe our services that are available. And this is both like analytical part where the data are analyzed, and we are supporting also by providing technology and advice. This is happening already right now as we speak.
I have to react here. Like, yes, there are companies that say we have solutions. I haven't seen this solution. Like in most of the cases, and very recently we've tested, for instance, the social media bot detection, And still, there are considerable loopholes through which you can do that. And for instance, the other thing, deepfake detection systems. There are plenty of companies around. We've tested these solutions. Every one of them is underwhelming. So I think this fact that there is somebody giving you a service doesn't mean it provides everything you need. So I don't think we have a solution as we sit here.
Please.
Just, well, isn't it interesting? The conversation is quite understandably and rightly about the defensive aspect of this. I just noticed a story this week by The Intercept, a news outlet that talked about Special Operations Command in America putting out a contract for AI agents that were inauthentic persona, fake accounts that could gather intelligence. And it's worth thinking there's an offensive side of this. And without commenting on it either way, it is interesting to think about the possibilities of these technologies to do other things, such as, for instance, have an influence amongst the Russian populace in bringing them more accurate and impactful information about the course of their war, or the Chinese population, or the Iranians. And there are all sorts of issues associated with that, and is fraught with sort of difficulty and risks. But there is a whole interesting, offensive, proactive, positive side of these technologies as well that perhaps we understandably feel a bit squeamish about discussing sometimes.
But we should discuss them. And I'm terribly sorry, we have 2 questions here. Please, let's take both these questions, and also this will be the final round.
Sure, thank you. Viesturs Beziņš, president of IATA Latvia. So just a couple of weeks ago in the Social Media Trends Conference, we heard a term. It's very easy to make a large language model nowadays. So how can we ensure that a large language model is telling people the truth that we want them to hear? For example, we all heard, the famous quote, 1 + 1 is 3. So how can we ensure that 1 + 1 remains 2? And is it regulation we're talking, or are there any other options here? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. And please, you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Tom Withington, Rusi. Thank you to all of the panelists. Fascinating and terrifying in equal measure, I would say. Shashank, quick question directed at your good self, if I may. One of the things I hear coming back from the military about AI is that there's a lot of promise, there's a huge amount of potential, but the big problem is that the communications backbone to move the terabits of information AI is going to generate is simply not there yet. Is that something that you're noticing? And if I could open that up perhaps to the rest of the panel, is that also a consideration in the civilian world?
Excellent. Well, how shall we start with? Yanis, let's start with you and 1 + 1.
I think pretty much the jury is out. I agree very much with Alina. I think we're very much likely to have a world where there will be alternative Chinese model available for the rest of the world, that they'll make any kind of possible way to get it there, and then use it for multiple ways of influence those populations. And there is a very interesting, disturbing thing that also a very recent research paper found, that you can actually hide small pieces of data within large language models that, under the circumstances, trigger fundamental change of the behavior of that model that you can't train away from. So you might have a good model that, with a right context, for instance, a crisis or something, turns around and becomes something very different. And there are no answers right now. So it's back to the fact, do we trust the ones that develop that? Unfortunately, right now, this is the terrain we're in. And we know at least whom we don't trust. I'm not sure whether we have an answer, who do we trust?
Every time I talk to you, Yanis, you find something new to scare me with. Thank you. Renata, so 1 + 1, can we ever trust? I think the question was much broader about the innate properties of AI. Can we ever trust AI to know that 1 + 1 is 2? Please.
Yeah, so first of all, right now, I think we're around 2,000 large language models or something like this, and the number is growing, and it's really about who is developing a model, and the next question is what are the data that are used to train the model, and then the third thing is how this model is monitored and controlled and audited. And I know it sounds boring, but this is how this technology works. So, and then depending on, so if you have, all three parameters, and there are more, that you will say, okay, yeah, I trust, and there is transparency, full transparency, is, then you can trust, but at the same time, so what we are saying, and we will continue saying, so human being is the one who is making decision and checking. So there is no such a thing as that we will give our responsibility to the language models, and then we are free and we are doing other things. So it's we are not here. So that's why it really depends. And so that's why we need to be very careful when we are building our solutions, and this is what is happening. So companies and individuals are building their solutions on those existing large and small language models. We need to make sure that we know what we are using and what's behind.
So we'll still need to learn multiplication table at school, and that's how we know that 1 + 1 is 2. Shashank, I guess you have.
Yes, just directly Tom's comments. First of all, it's even more basic than that, right? I mean, government IT infrastructure generally tends to suck. Maybe you're an exception here, maybe it's brilliant, but in most governments it's pretty bad. So, can we even check our email in a somewhere different, let alone do you have fancy data systems? But I agree with you, the data backbone is a problem, but a more specific variant of that problem is that you need cloud infrastructure for these things in many cases. Okay, that's problematic enough as it is, because this is turning into superpower infrastructure, right? My colleagues recently at The Economist did a study of cloud reliance among Asian countries, and you can see the bifurcation among those who opt for Chinese companies and those who opt for American companies. In Singapore, it's 50-50, but you can't do it in-house, right? It's too expensive, it's too difficult, so this is becoming hugely geopolitical. And finally, the additional burden on militaries, more than on other bits of government, is that you need secret or top-secret clouds, which are even more expensive and difficult. And that's a huge challenge. And we're seeing intelligence agencies invest in these, but as people will know, some people understand, the challenge of moving data between the classified side and the unclassified side is very difficult. And if you don't invest in all of that infrastructure and that backbone, you can have all the fancy models in the world and all the great sensors and drones and satellites collecting the data, but you're missing the guts of the system.
Yeah.
Alina, the questions that you heard, but also one more question. This is going to be the very last thing that we're here, unfortunately, because we have to end. We haven't talked much about how the authoritarian actors have actually already used, if they have already used AI to consolidate their own power and stability. Maybe you have a reflection on that as well.
If I can just pick up on a point that Shashank just made, I think very well. When we have this conversation maybe again next year here, I think we want to focus on a more holistic picture, because there's been this kind of AI plus, AI geopolitics, AI, fill in the blank, but we're not talking about algorithms. Because that's what artificial intelligence is. It's an algorithm that's existed for decades and decades. What we're really talking about is data availability, data storage, which is cloud, and then data processing capability, which is chips, and then the supply chains that are involved in the semiconductor space in particular. And the big debate in the US now, for example, is on AI chips and our own ability to diversify supply chains, to not have dependencies in authoritarian states in particular, because critical minerals come into that. So this is such a big issue set. And I think we're carving out little pieces of it, but you can't talk about artificial intelligence without talking about all of these other layers that make it possible, because again, we've had the algorithms forever. What is new is that we have the data storage capabilities, and we have the processing capabilities. But with that comes a whole slew of other issues, which is why it's not just about AI. There's an economic and broader competitive component here. But I think to your question, I would just go back to a point that I think Giannis also made about the reduction of costs. the guy wrote a paper on digital authoritarianism in like 2018. And the point of that paper is to say, look, the Chinese model of surveillance and repression, which relies on technologies for facial recognition and tracking, all these kinds of things, data processing, is very appealing to a lot of authoritarian states across the world, but it's very expensive to implement because you need people. China has something like, last time I checked, it's probably more now, like 64 ministries and agencies that are devoted to just like surveillance and data processing. They're collecting from their cameras, they're collecting people's social media, all medical records, all of that. Shashank, you may correct me on that, maybe more now. But now what's happened, of course, is that now it's incredibly cheap. And all those human functions that they used to need are now being complemented, supplemented by AI capabilities. So I think this is an opportunity, I think, for Beijing to export this model in a way that actually will be very useful, in countries where you have more of a criminal or junta type government or dictatorial government that wants to repress and surveil their own population. And so I think we don't have enough research about the export side of this and how much the reduction in costs has actually produced, now what we could call a global digital authoritarianism, not one that just focuses on China or maybe Russia. And I think this is a huge, huge problem. Again, I just go back to my point. We need to be aggressively ensuring that countries and people are not relying on these technologies. And if the governments are using them, we need to get them directly to the people.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure that the answers we got to the question about the power of AI are really to our liking today, but at least we got a fantastic to-do list, and we should stop there. Thank you very much, panelists. It's been really interesting.